The first time I really felt that something had shifted between men and women was not when I read a viral essay or saw a dramatic video, it was when, in the middle of an ordinary working day, a man in his late 30s sat down in my office, looked at the floor for a very long time, and finally said, "It's easier to be alone than to keep trying to prove that I'm not the enemy," and there was no bitterness in his voice. Only a bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that doesn't show up as shouting or drama but as a quiet decision not to offer his heart again. A week later, a different man, younger, successful, good-humored on the surface, told me, "I can pay my bills. I can cook my own food. I can enjoy my hobbies. And when I look at what relationships cost these days, emotionally and financially, it just doesn't add up anymore. Every time I try to lead, I'm told I'm controlling. Every time I set a boundary, I'm told I'm toxic. And if I have no standards at all, I'm seen as weak." And as I listened, I realized that behind all the noise about men are trash and there are no good men left, there is a quieter, less dramatic story unfolding. A story about men who are not raging online but simply stepping back, choosing solitude or very careful distance over the chaos they associate with modern relationships. And this is exactly the emotional landscape why men are walking away from relationships. The harsh cultural language men hear every day, phrases like, "men are trash," and "men are the problem," not as harmless jokes but as the emotional climate they live in. It puts that climate next to very real data about women's rising levels of anxiety, burnout, depression, and relational dissatisfaction despite unprecedented freedom and opportunity. Asking the provocative question of whether our current ideas about empowerment are really making anyone happier, and then, most powerfully, it hands the microphone to ordinary men and lets them speak plainly about what they actually want from a relationship and what finally pushes them to walk away. Not in abstract psychological jargon but in the simple language of lived experience. Words like honesty, loyalty, reciprocity, peace, appreciation, accountability, respect, being seen, being needed, privacy, and emotional safety. Concepts that sound old-fashioned on the surface but, put together, describe a deeply modern fatigue, the fatigue of being told you are privileged and powerful while feeling, in your closest relationships, chronically unseen and accused. A type of male pain that is often ridiculed or minimized. Men who feel overwhelmed by relational drama. Who feel that their efforts are taken for granted. Who feel that their desire for a certain kind of feminine energy is mocked as sexist. Rarely find spaces where their experiences are described without immediate counterattack. And when a text finally articulates their complaints, that leading is framed as control, that standards are labeled toxic, that their wish for peace is dismissed as laziness, that their provider role is expected but never appreciated, it feels like someone has finally seen them. And being seen is an extremely powerful antidote to shame. A coherent narrative in the middle of chaos, suggesting that men are not disappearing, as some women fear, but retreating by choice because they no longer see relationships as worth the cost when partners cannot put the relationship above their ego. And while that story is obviously simplified, it gives shape to a feeling that, without words, just sits inside the body as heaviness and confusion. The central themes are clear. Describes a generation of women who, despite being more educated, independent, and visible than ever before, are also more anxious, burnt out, and disconnected, and pairs that with the image of men who are watching from the sidelines, not because they hate women but because they find that many of the women they meet have adopted beliefs that make genuine partnership almost impossible. It points to modern feminist narratives that emphasize strength, independence, and self-protection for women but, in their most extreme forms, teach them to distrust men, to always be on guard, to see dependence or vulnerability as weakness, and to view any male desire for influence or leadership as suspect. It argues that in pursuing visibility and validation, some women have unintentionally traded away older virtues like humility, loyalty, and self-sacrifice, and that now, despite their empowerment, they are exhausted, guarded, and puzzled as to why no one stays, defending themselves by saying, "There are no good men," instead of asking whether they have become capable of sustaining the kind of relationship good men actually want, and then, in a structure that feels almost like courtroom testimony, it lets men list what that good man actually asks for: honesty that includes transparency, not just answering questions but voluntarily sharing information, loyalty that goes beyond words to concrete behaviors like closing doors, to outside flirting and speaking respectfully both in private and in public, reciprocity that acknowledges that partnership cannot be one person pouring and another simply receiving, appreciation for the burden of provision and protection that many men still carry, not as an entitlement but as a difficult choice, respect shown especially during conflict, in not weaponizing his vulnerabilities or undermining his masculinity, a sense of peace in the relationship, meaning not the absence of emotion but the absence of constant manufactured problems and combative energy, accountability from women for their part in relational friction, rather than placing every problem on men, the desire to be seen, heard, and needed, not for status but for who they are, the need for privacy, so that every argument is not broadcast to friends and social media, the need for emotional safety around vulnerability, so that what they confess is not stored as ammunition, and finally, a wish for a woman who wants to build a shared life, turning home from a location into a person, a question that many men quietly live with but rarely voice. If I can meet my basic needs alone, why should I invite someone into my life who brings more conflict than comfort, more judgment than gratitude, more demands than contribution? And even if that question is formed in a wounded, biased way, ignoring the many women who do show up with generosity and accountability, it still deserves to be examined, because people do not walk away from love lightly, they walk away when love, or what is presented to them as love, repeatedly feels indistinguishable from constant stress, criticism, and emotional danger. In my own work, I have seen this play out in ways that are both painfully ordinary and deeply symbolic. Imagine a man, let's call him Daniel, who has carved out a stable if modest life, working a job he does not particularly love but does diligently, paying his bills, maintaining his small apartment. When he meets someone new, he naturally stretches himself, he picks up extra shifts to afford nicer dates. He invests time in listening, he adjusts his routines to accommodate her, he learns what kind of food she likes and where she feels comfortable. At first, this effort feels good, because it is voluntarily offered and reciprocated with enthusiasm. But over time, in his particular relationship, the temporary effort becomes the permanent expectation, and the appreciation gradually disappears. The weekend trip he planned is not discussed as a gift but criticized for the hotel choice not being luxury enough. The long days he spends at work to cover their life are not seen as sacrifice but treated as bare minimum. His attempts to set limits on how much help he can give her extended family financially are greeted with accusations of stinginess or a lack of real man energy in sessions. Daniel does not say, "Women are trash." He says, "I don't know how to give any more without losing myself. And when I pull back even a little, it turns into a fight about how I'm not committed," and slowly, quietly, he decides that the cost is too high, that his nervous system prefers the calm predictability of living alone to the constant emotional audits of his masculinity. And so he withdraws, not with a dramatic speech but with a firm boundary. No more long-term relationships until he sees a fundamentally different pattern. On the other side of town, there is a woman named Sarah who is also sitting in a therapist's office, complaining bitterly that all the good men are gone. describing a dating landscape full of non-committal, distracted, emotionally closed partners who seemed terrified of settling down. When we gently explore her most recent relationships, a subtle pattern emerges. When men set gentle boundaries, she experiences them as oppression. When they express hurt, she hears criticism. When they ask for more respect or less public airing of private fights, she interprets it as an attempt to silence her. She has grown up absorbing a culture that tells her, in its more extreme forms, that anything that constrains her impulses is patriarchy, that her independence is sacred, that a man who wants peace is boring. Yet, she longs for deep connection and cannot see how her own unexamined behavior, the group chats filled with mocking screenshots of his texts, the constant testing of his jealousy, the refusal to apologize because women should never bow down, the habit of cutting jokes about his income or appearance, might be exactly the patterns that make stable, decent men quietly back away. If Sarah reads the essay in question, she will likely feel attacked. But if she pauses defensiveness, she might see a few uncomfortable reflections that could, if she is brave, become invitations to grow, on honesty, not just as a moral rule but as the foundation of trust. The idea is that a man wants a partner who does not manipulate his perception by presenting only edited versions of reality, who does not wait to be asked the exact right questions before volunteering important information, who does not treat the truth as a negotiation tool but as a default posture. This goes a step further into transparency. The kind of proactive sharing that says, I want you to hear from me, not from someone else. That a man approached me today and I declined, because I respect you enough to keep the field of our relationship clean. And while this might sound extreme to some, what it really reflects is a deep sensitivity many men have to feeling blindsided, to discovering that something they would have been fine with had it been shared becomes a bomb when it is hidden. And this is not a gendered pattern so much as a human one. Secrets create distance, even if the content of the secret is innocent. Loyalty, in the essay's framing, is not a vague sentiment but a series of choices. Choosing to close doors that would invite ambiguous attention. Choosing to speak about one's partner with respect in public spaces. Choosing not to flirt for ego boosts. Choosing to hold the relationship as something that requires protective boundaries. Men in the piece describe feeling confused when partners demand ironclad loyalty from them but keep all their own options open. Staying in contact with exes. Posting seductively online for validation. Keeping male friends who clearly hope for more. And then labeling any discomfort a man has with this ecosystem as insecurity. The deeper psychological need beneath this is not patriarchal control but attachment security. The feeling that the person you have committed to is not constantly scanning the horizon for someone better. Of course, men must also examine how they behave, and many fail this same test of loyalty. Another central theme. Relationships decay when the flow of giving and receiving becomes too one-sided for too long. Men report that what pushes them toward the exit is not a lack of beauty or ambition in their partner, but the sense that she has become a consumer of the relationship rather than a co-creator. Always asking what she is getting, and rarely asking what she is bringing. They describe small but telling experiences, like coming home from a long day, only to be greeted with a list of things they failed to do rather than a simple, thank you, for the things they did manage, or planning special moments that are received without much acknowledgement because the bar has silently moved higher. A man who can live comfortably enough on his own needs a compelling reason to voluntarily stretch himself beyond that comfort. And if he experiences his partner as someone who sees his extra effort as invisible or expected, something inside him recalibrates and says, this is not worth it. Appreciation and respect, particularly in conflict. Men express that what they most dread is not disagreement itself, but what happens to their dignity in the middle of it. Describing scenarios where vulnerabilities they once shared in trust are thrown back at them in arguments, where their attempts to lead are mocked publicly, where their shortcomings are broadcast to friends, where sex is withdrawn and used as leverage rather than as a space of mutual solace. Quite a few recount that the first time they truly began to walk away emotionally was not after one big betrayal but after realizing that the person they had opened their soul to was prepared to use that knowledge as a weapon. And in psychological terms, this is one of the most serious breaches of trust, when a safe attachment figure becomes a source of shame and exposure. Another deeply important idea is the notion of peace. When men say they want a woman who is their peace, popular commentary often misinterprets this as wanting a doormat, someone who never challenges them, someone who absorbs bad male behavior without protest. But when you listen carefully to the voices quoted, what they actually mean is something more subtle. They want a relationship that does not constantly amplify problems that don't exist. That does not turn every minor difference into a battle for dominance. That does not project the wounds of past partners onto them at every turn. That does not interpret every disagreement as evidence that they are bad men, given that life itself is already full of real stressors, demanding jobs, financial pressures, health issues, family responsibilities. They are asking that their home life not become another theater of war over imagined slights. This does not mean they want robotic compliance. It means they long for a partner whose emotional responses are not always at maximum intensity and who can sometimes choose unity over winning. Closely connected to peace is accountability. Many men struggle to find women who can sincerely say, "I was wrong there," or "I overreacted," or "I hurt you and I want to change that," and whether or not that generalization is statistically accurate. The craving for mutual accountability is real. Relationships are systems, not courtrooms, and every conflict emerges from the interaction of two histories, two nervous systems, two sets of assumptions. When one partner consistently treats themselves as the injured innocent and the other as the sole culprit, and this is precisely where many men reach their limit, not because they think they are perfect, but because they are tired of carrying all the blame. Any adult who cannot tolerate looking at their own part in repeated conflicts, who uses shame and blame as their only tools, will eventually drive away anyone who values their own sanity. Touches on being seen and heard, pointing out that while women often emphasize their need to be listened to, men have a parallel need to feel that their character, intentions, and efforts are understood and given the benefit of the doubt. They want their insights to matter. Not necessarily to prevail every time, but to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as primitive or selfish. They long for their feelings to be acknowledged as real, even when those feelings do not dictate the outcome of a decision. In my sessions, I cannot count how many men have told me that they stopped sharing not because they had nothing left to say, but because their attempts at expression were so frequently met with eye rolls, jokes, or lectures that it felt safer to go quiet. Emotional silence in men is often interpreted as a natural male deficiency, but in reality it is frequently a learned response to repeated invalidation. Privacy appears as a perhaps surprising male desire in an age of constant public sharing. Men describe the humiliation of knowing that their arguments have been recounted in group chats, that intimate details of their vulnerabilities are being laughed about among friends, that their mistakes have become stories strangers know. This creates a deep sense of exposure and betrayal, and it erodes trust even if the content shared is not extreme. To build a psychologically safe bond, both partners must know that what happens in the relationship will, as a default, be handled between them first and foremost, not turned into entertainment or a way to score social points. When this container is repeatedly broken, especially in early relationships, it is no wonder that some men decide it is simpler to avoid serious attachments altogether than to risk becoming the unwitting subject of a group chat. Finally, challenging women to reconsider the type of men they chase and the stories they tell themselves about the male population. It is not that there are no good men, but that many women overlook them because they are drawn toward high-status, charismatic outliers who are least likely to offer loyalty or stability, and who then confirm their belief that men are unreliable. It urges women to distinguish between what their ego wants, a partner who makes them look impressive to others, and what their soul actually needs, A person of character with whom they feel safe. Even if he is less glamorous. And from a psychological perspective, this is simply a call to examine unconscious attraction patterns. To ask not, do I feel butterflies, which can just as easily be anxiety, but, do I feel peaceful and respected around this person, even when nothing exciting is happening? Channels a wave of male frustration into a structured message. We are not all vanishing because we are weak. Many of us are stepping back because the relational terms being offered do not make sense to us. We do not primarily want a partner with impressive income or status. We want someone whose character makes it safe to give our life and effort. We are tired of being told that wanting honesty, loyalty, appreciation, peace, and sexual connection makes us controlling or fragile, and we are reaching a point where remaining single, or staying in very casual arrangements, feels less painful than entering into yet another emotional arrangement in which we are presumed guilty until proven innocent and still punished after we have proven ourselves. That said, as a psychologist who has heard the other side too, I believe the essay's most valuable use is not as a weapon in a gender war but as a mirror and a starting point for deeper reflection. Men can use it to feel less alone in their disappointments, to recognize that their longing for respect and peace is legitimate, and then to examine their own behavior and boundaries so that they do not keep choosing partners who cannot give those things. Women can use it to confront, with courage, the aspects of their own conditioning that have perhaps made them overly defensive, overly entitled, or blind to the sacrifices men quietly make. And to ask whether the story, "all men are trash," is really a description of reality or a shield against the vulnerability of truly seeing and choosing a good man when he appears. In the end, the phenomenon of men walking away from relationships cannot be reduced to one essay or one explanation. It emerges from a complex web of cultural messages, economic pressures, technological distractions, and personal wounds. But at the center of that phenomenon lies a simple human truth. When any group of people feels that the costs of connection vastly outweigh the benefits, when they feel more attacked than appreciated, more scrutinized than understood, more used than loved, they will eventually withdraw to protect themselves. If we want to change that trajectory, we cannot simply insist that men man up and keep trying, nor can we simply insist that women lower their standards. We will have to do something much more demanding, which is to relearn the basic arts of partnership, telling the truth even when it is awkward, honoring promises, sharing burdens, apologizing without humiliation, keeping each other's secrets, regulating our emotions enough to have hard conversations without verbal violence, and remembering, in a culture that constantly whispers, "You deserve more," to ask at least as often, "What am I willing to give?" If there is a hopeful note to end on, it is this: good men have not disappeared, and neither have good women. They are simply more cautious now, slower to trust, more selective about whom they offer their deepest effort to. When a man who has walked away returns, it will not be because an essay shamed him into trying again, but because he has met someone whose honesty, loyalty, reciprocity, appreciation, respect, and emotional maturity convince him that this time, the cost of loving is matched by the beauty of being loved back. And that is not a gendered hope but a human one, a reminder that beyond the noise of slogans and statistics, what keeps us together or pulls us apart is still, as it has always been, the daily choices we make about how we treat each other. When nobody else is watching, the essay speaks about a need for recognition, for validation, for appreciation in the emotional economy that often feels unbalanced, where one side is giving more, expecting less, while the other demands more without reciprocating. It's easy to see how men, especially those who feel trapped in that cycle, would eventually choose to walk away. But behind that choice is not hatred or judgment of women. It's an understanding that emotional peace, stability, and respect are non-negotiable in a relationship. And when those things are missing, No amount of sacrifice or patience can fill the void. To truly move forward, both men and women need to re-examine their expectations, their values, and the true purpose of a partnership. It's not about control or power, but about shared respect, mutual growth, and the willingness to create something meaningful together. The emotional disconnect between the genders is deep, but it is not insurmountable. As we reflect on the frustrations described in the essay, let us ask ourselves, what are we truly seeking in our relationships, and how can we give that to others? What are the standards we hold for ourselves? And are we meeting those standards before expecting others to? It's time for both men and women to step into relationships not with expectations of perfection, but with the understanding that growth is a constant process. The idea of walking away isn't just about escape, it's about knowing when a relationship has reached its limit and realizing that personal well-being should never be sacrificed for the sake of keeping a relationship alive. Sometimes, walking away is the most powerful choice one can make, not out of anger, but out of a deep understanding that peace and mutual respect must be prioritized above all else. We all deserve to be in relationships that enhance our lives, not drain us. And to build those relationships, we need to practice patience, empathy, and honesty. It's important to acknowledge the deep wounds many have carried into their relationships and to understand how these wounds influence their ability to connect, trust, and love. But healing is possible when both parties are willing to put in the work, not just as individuals but as partners who genuinely care for one another's well-being. The essay brings attention to the many barriers that have been created, some self-inflicted and some societal, that prevent men from feeling that their emotional needs will be met. But it also offers an opportunity for growth if both genders are willing to do the hard work of vulnerability, communication, and understanding. Walking away is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new chapter. For those who decide to return to relationships, it will not be because they were convinced to, but because they found someone who made them feel truly seen and appreciated for who they are, not for what they can provide or what they can fix. As we close this conversation, remember, true partnership is not about giving until you break, it's about sharing the load, growing together, and lifting each other up. Relationships are not meant to be a source of constant frustration, but rather a space where both individuals can thrive, heal, and contribute to each other's growth.